Welcome to Shared Drive Swampland, where good files go to get lost, where version control gets sucked into the mud, and approvals move slower than a swamp turtle on a hot day. Have you ever opened up a file and thought, hey, who touched this last? Or if you've ever dug through folders like you're digging for treasure in a bayou, this episode is for you. Today, we are diving into the murky waters of messy file management, tribal workflows, and design teams that are just looking to stay afloat. And as your tour guide through this swamp, I'll help you explore how tools like SOLIDWORKS PDM and Manage can get you through these tough times. But hey, I only know my way around the swamp. I don't know how to get you out of it. Luckily, however, I have contracted us a person who can help us build that bridge across the muck. Where, you ask? Into a place of clarity, speed, and collaboration. So grab your boots, hang on to your data, and hold on tight as we find our way out of this shared drive swampland. Gurpreet, welcome to my swampland here on SolidWorks Live. How's it going, buddy?
Yeah, Sean, it's going great. And first of all, thank you for having me. So it's always great to be live with you and the other team members in the live sessions. Yeah.
You know, I wish it was on a better occasion, maybe with a better theme. It's a little muggy out here, I would say. But no, I've asked you to come on as a feature guest, really on SolidWorks Live, and we don't do this all the time where we just have a singular guest. But given the subject matter, which is shared drive swamplands, and how hopefully we can do things a bit better than that out there in the industry, there is a specific reason, and I would say several specific reasons that I asked you to come on, and largely that has to do with not only your current role, which is a bit of a newer role here at SolidWorks, but really your past experiences that have brought you here. So to get us started, for those of us who are not familiar with your experience related to today's episode, can you tell us kind of the road that led you here to SolidWorks Live here as it relates to your dealings in industry with industry customers?
Yeah, sure, Sean. So before joining this team in North America, so I was back there in India for past 16 years working for Dassault Systems in various, you can say, roles. Majorly, it was the role of IPC or the territory technical manager. So wherein I have been a lot of, you can say, on ground experience working with customers, positioning, SolidWorks, data management, simulation, and almost all solutions. And lately, I was involved thoroughly in spearheading technical sales for the 3D experience products as well. So a lot of experience on ground on implementation and positioning of our data management solution with our customers. And I think that could be one of the reasons that I'm here with you today.
All right, so I want to take that down a notch. I want to say, so you've seen the good, the bad, the ugly when it comes to working with SolidWorks files, right? We all love to go in SolidWorks to design our parts, our assemblies. Some of us even like making drawings, but I think we both know that when it comes to storing those files, storing those parts, assemblies, how we track, where things are, how we name them, our processes related to those things, how we interoperate, which is really the big focus of today. Once again, you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And that's typically why someone would call you in, right? Because
Yeah.
things aren't quite working. Is that correct?
True. I totally agree. And what I feel is sometimes customers feel that I have just started venturing into 3D design. Right now, I don't need a data management solution. But what I would say is the day they transition themselves from maybe a 2D system to 3D, or maybe adopted SolidWorks, that day itself they should go ahead and start exploring and investing in data management solution too. Because if you are starting at a very early stage, you won't face all the hiccups we are going to talk about today. and those hiccups and challenges really cost a lot to a company. Yeah.
So let's get into it because I think when we talked and when we sort of navigated the subject matter and the issues, the swampland at hand, I think the main area, the sort of area that underpinned all of it was, I think, really just staying organized. And I think that was a large reason why when you would get that call, that email, you get pinged, texted, whatever, through a colleague or through a customer, you would say it was largely about staying organized or the seeming inability to do that. So I want to start there if that's okay. So when you're let's kind of start here. In your experience, when you were out there in the field, how did you see teams managing or maybe even failing to manage their SOLIDWORKS files, their SOLIDWORKS file versions, and their design iterations? I would say specifically though, when we were in context where you had multiple designers. Now that could be a team of 2 or 3, or that could even be even more, sort of working within, maybe the same part or, maybe abstracting it a bit, maybe even the same assembly. What were you seeing out there in the field?
Yeah, so Sean, when multiple designers work on same assembly or parts or drawing, so version control becomes one of the biggest challenge. So without a system in place, most teams fall back on I would say shared network folders, or maybe local drives, or maybe cloud storage like Google Drive or Dropbox. So, but these I would say mechanisms weren't built for CAD collaboration. So these systems do not understand the file relationship, dependencies, or revisions in the way the engineering team actually needs. So what ends up happening is, I would say, a mix of manual workarounds. So people renaming files with the suffixes like final, final 123, final, final latest, and so on, and trying to coordinate changes over email or in a meeting or over a phone call. So it's messy and unreliable. So a file might get overwritten, or maybe two people might make conflicting changes and to the same part without realizing it. So these errors aren't always caught immediately, and that leads to maybe wasted work, or in a worst case scenario, it can also end up in having flawed parts in production, and at the very fag end of the assembly line, parts will not fit together, and the root cause could be because we were not using a proper data management solution. So, and then there is an issue of, I can say, locking files while making changes too. So, without it, someone, if they tries to make the change, especially in a scenario where more than one person is working on the same project, so maybe they end up in editing something which is already being edited by someone else. So, in the best case scenario, it just causes confusion. But in the worst case, it creates maybe rework and downstream delays. And that exactly what a structured data management system like SolidWorks product data management start to show a real value in such a scenario.
So I was taking notes there. You mentioned when we're talking about managing file versions, working within the same parts and assemblies, that there can be issues of rework, right? We know that. Also, and this is a great point, issues of making parts wrongly or parts within a system not fitting together physically. And that comes into play, of course, with material level cost issues, right? You're literally not only wasting time, people hours, you're literally wasting material. You're spending money for material, and then you're wasting it by making things that don't work. And that's just one part of it, right? That's when you can find your stuff, but everyone can find your stuff, and you aren't in agreement on who's working with the stuff and when and why, right? So I want to move on now to the other side of that, which is that you've made the stuff and you just can't find it, which stinks. Yeah, to use the swap terminology, you're knee deep in the muck. You're looking around, you can't find a specific file or a specific design iteration. So what have you seen out there in the field that are really the ramifications of those specific issues?
Yeah. So, Sean, I would say this is one of those issues that might sound minor, that I'm not able to find a file, but it can actually cost teams days or even weeks in a cumulative delay. Uh, yeah. So, when someone can't find a correct file, so let's say they are looking for a version that was not approved maybe last quarter, so they are often stuck digging through folders and relying on probably a memory or a shared drive, or asking colleagues who might even not remember either. So if a wrong version is used in manufacturing, it could mean production of inaccurate parts. That's not just a technical issue, but actually it's a business issue. So if you just remember my statement that I've just made, so it might sound a minor issue that I'm not able to find a file, but actually it lands up in a bigger business issues that actually eat up the manufacturing industry, its profits. So we have seen cases where missed details leads to full production recalls or even failed prototypes. So from I would say, design standpoint, it also creates frustration. So engineers end up in duplicating work because they can't find what exactly exists already, or they waste time redoing designs because an older revision was accidentally used. Over time, it's not only burns the valuable engineering hours, it erodes the trust in the overall process. So I would say, more critically, it makes audits and traceability nearly impossible. So if you are in a regulated industry like maybe aerospace or medical, you are asked to show when a change was made, by whom it was made, and why it was made, and it's a nightmare without basically having a single source of truth that exists. And if there is a single source of truth exists, then finding any document could be just a matter of a blink of an eye. So uh, this minor problem can lead to a huge confusion and chaos, which can be easily resolved through a structured, I would say, a data management system in place. And this will definitely is going to improve the overall quality, efficiency, and I can say compliance requirements for an organization.
I think you did a great job, at least for me, having listened to you just now, talking about how something that can seem to be a me problem ultimately is not just a me problem, right?
Yeah,
There are various
it's a business problem.
yes, it's literally a business problem that can come up. And so, I imagine, as I think about, and I've worked with lots of SolidWorks customers over the course of my career. I've been in these shoes as well. And so one thing I want to ask you for our viewers, however, is the first stop typically isn't just to we're human beings, we're natural problem solvers. The first stop isn't typically to say, oh, I need some sort of service to do this, or I need some sort of product to do this, right? Typically, you're trying to instill kind of self-made or manual processes, or use what's in arm's reach, right? To try to solve that problem, the various types of problems, a plethora of issues that our customers actually do, as you just said, having worked in the field, right? Run into. So, what are some of we talk about examples, like what are some of the examples that you've seen of customers trying to, within arm's reach, almost kind of pre-PDM or pre-system, trying to solve these problems? Like what have they tried, and kind of what are the results typically?
But Sean, first of all, I really appreciate that you have used this term called pre-PDM.
Pre-PDM.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I believe most of our customer do a lot of pre-PDM, I would say, stuff. And I feel most teams, those are operating on pre-PDM, I would say they are in a creative chaos. So they spend tons of, I would say, creative time in finding ways how to manage the data without using a PDM solution. But I would say it's a creative chaos. So they might be using maybe Windows folders for organization of their data, and maybe some NAS drive or maybe some network drive, Excel spreadsheets for version tracking, email for approvals, or maybe a bit of cloud storage thrown in for sharing the documents. And for small teams or a startup, this patchwork might feel okay for a while, but I will never recommend. But it doesn't scale up and it's not at all reliable. So the biggest limitation I would say here for a pre-PDM setup is that they lack integration. Nothing is connected to your CAD tool. So and there is no automation. So imagine for design we are using SolidWorks. For managing our files, I'm using Windows Explorer or maybe a network folder. Then for sharing my data, I'm using maybe some sort of a cloud storage or maybe Google Drive. Then for communication, I'm using email. For capturing any tracking any changes, I'm using Excel. But none of this integrates or connects with the other application. So I'm spending a lot of time and burning a lot of engineering hours in finding out how to manage it. But it at the end of the day, it's a creative chaos. So if a revision is made in let's say CAD model, someone has to remember to update the spreadsheet. And in few cases I've seen, instead of spreadsheet, people also have a piece of paper or maybe a notebook wherein they are gonna note each and every you can say activity they do. They register it. So even if they are using spreadsheet, still it is not something which is scalable. So if a drawing is approved, someone else has to email it to the next stakeholder to communicate. And these manual hands off are where most of the risk lies. So also in pre-PDM environments, there is no visibility. You can't see who is working on what, so what's being approved and what is pending and where the bottlenecks are. And when teams grows or when the complexity increases, the fragility becomes I would say liability. So that's why most teams eventually hit a ceiling and start exploring a product data management solution. So not because their current tools are bad, but because they are no longer, I would say, enough to handle their overall requirements.
So we've gone through the full slate, I think, in terms of how we wanted to look at staying organized, right? We talked about, right, just to recap, sifting through the swamp, right, of trying to manage different file versions, different design iterations, design teams, designers, engineers working on the same parts concurrently, same assemblies concurrently, without any sort of oversight or system or any sort of infrastructure to guide how to do that, right? We talked about being sort of knee deep in the muck when you're looking for a file or once again, a design iteration and you cannot, and the ramifications, the deep business level ramifications of that. And we've also talked about, moreover, just what it looks like in an environment where holistically we're in that sort of pre-PDM state where we're using a lot of maybe Windows-based utilities and maybe some others, right? So maybe cloud storage utilities like a Google Drive in this sort of piecemeal way when there is no sort of unified object system that's understanding the interrelations between activities. Some of us still like are still using, as I'm making notes on my piece of paper here as you talk. Some of us are still using piece of paper, right? I've seen that very recently as well, in a real example. You mentioned this term, a creative chaos, which I think will stick with me and is definitely welcomed here in the shared drive swampland. So let's move on. You started to get into automating workflows, boosting efficiencies, and I think once you have that underpinning of staying organized and you have that part down, I think that's the natural escalation, right? How do I automate more my processes, my workflows? Once I have my files, my data, my infrastructure kind of set in that way, how do I escalate? How do I zoom out of the swamplands here, if you will? And so let's get into design workflows, right? Let's talk about that. So, where have you seen in the field where our customers are sort of dragging their canoes where they don't necessarily have to? They're doing a lot of repetitive tasks. They're doing a lot of manual work in terms of their design workflows, or maybe they're just doing things in a way that is prone to error, or where there are lots of details that could potentially slip through the cracks. What are you seeing, and what have you seen out there in the field when it comes to those items?
In fact, it's a great question, Sean. And honestly, it's quite a few, yeah, I would say, uh, ways the things can slip through cracks. So even in companies with strong engineering teams, a lot of their day-to-day workflow is still manual. So things like renaming or naming a file, version tracking, creating PDFs for reviews, emailing drawings around for reviews and approvals. All these are repetitive tasks, and it eats up time and are prone to errors. So another one is maybe I would say tracking tasks of in terms of project planning and project management. So most teams rely on spreadsheets or emails or maybe some standalone project management tools to follow up on tasks. And there is no live, I would say, dashboarding that shows what's done, so what's pending or why it's delayed, and it makes really, I would say, easily to skip a step or forgot. So especially when you work with tight deadlines. So and approval is something that's a big one. So designers often have to wait for the feedback without knowing if someone has even looked at the file. So if you are not proactively notified or there is no centralized record, the approval might get lost in a scuffle. So in short, anything that relies on a person to remember something or manually communicate it is prone to slipping through cracks, and that's where automation can make a drastic difference.
So you talked about, you naturally hit on, I think, the next area that I wanted to get into, which is more specific examples, right, of actual engineering processes that many of us who have ever been in this design or engineering capacity or environment are naturally familiar with, things that need to happen, right? You mentioned already handling design approvals, right? That was one that I had jotted down. Engineering change requests, of course. These are things that happen to varying degrees, to various degrees of success and efficacy. So let's spend a bit more time there in terms of what slows that down, what breaks down those processes. Kind of as we look to clear through the sludge here. What can you tell us in terms of examples that you've seen there?
Yeah. So in fact, the I would say the best example that I've seen is approvals and engineering changes. So these are often handled through emails or maybe standalone forms. Maybe it may be a Word document, PDF, or maybe many a times it is actually printed document that you need to get it signed from everybody who's part of the approval process or the change management process. And then or probably even if it is electronically done through maybe a PDF or a Word document, it still needs to be emailed to the next person. And there is we lack a lot of traceability over there. So it's a chain of people trying to remember who is next in line, and there is a very little visibility into where the request stands at the moment. So I would say the biggest slowdown comes from delays in response. So let's say someone is on vacation or missed an email or doesn't have the right version, and without built-in tracking, the designers doesn't know if the change is being approved, rejected, or still they need more clarification, or they are waiting for a few more details. And another common could be a failure point is probably is the documentation. So even if the change is approved, so there is no formal audit trail, so no log shows who signed off and when, and that makes future troubleshooting and compliance a real problem. So I have seen a lot of our existing customers, so wherein they have been following all these manual processes, maybe they have already at the fag end of approving their design, and then things are in the prototyping stage, and suddenly there is a change which is initiated either by the customer itself, by their customer itself, or maybe from the purchase team, or maybe from manufacturing, or somebody in the organization. And then they basically spend a lot of time in incorporating that change, but eventually during the process they missed uh, updating all the required stakeholders. And in that case, many a time you produce something which is of the older version, and the and which is before that change happens, and actually we generate a lot of scrap, and ironically, uh, customers budget this scrap in their overall project, so which can be totally eliminated.
Yeah,
So
it's like it's a standard operational expense, right?
exactly. So if I break it down, it comes from the lack of structure, no automation, and poor visibility, and that leads to overall frustration, missed deadlines, and even quality issues down the line.
I think one of the biggest takeaways, and I think about this quite a lot as someone who has seen it work well, when you have different systems or different services working together. Basically, the stuff that you're using, the software you're using to help you get various parts of your job at different portions or different times in your job done. When you see it work well, I think one of the things that really sticks out to me is that when you don't have a space that is actively understanding that I, Sean, am the same person that writes emails and makes CAD and interacts with tasks, that's the same Sean. It's not just the same, you know what I mean? The same name with different accounts all over the place. There's no unifying record, no unifying audit trail of that. Like, that's when things really become a mess because you think like, okay, I'm a 5-person design team. Well, think about like you've said, all the services that you're potentially using, many of which I just, mentioned, including SolidWorks, right? Sean is like 20 different things in that environment. Your Preet is like 20 different entities, right? And so how do you try it becomes such a rat's nest in a way. So that's one of the bigger kind of takeaways. And I know we've talked a lot within this scenery, the backdrop of Swampland here. We talked a lot about problems and how things can go wrong. And we have briefly sort of given ideas of how things could work better, right? Uh, more flow. I was thinking about this earlier. More water flow, less swamp water, right? How can we get to a spot like that? And so I wanted to give us some space here to talk about that. What are, in your view, at least, let's start there. What would a smarter design process or workflow actually look like?
Yeah. In fact, a smart process would feel, first of all, effortless. So, yep, give the total control. Let's say a designer finishes a drawing. Instead of exporting it and emailing it for approval, they check it into the system. That triggers a predefined workflow, which automatically notifies the right reviewers. So they get alert, open the file, reviews it, leaves feedback, or even approve it, and all at one place. And every action is logged automatically and tracked. So if the changes are needed, the system routes the file back to the designer with clear notes. So once it is approved, it moves to the next stage, says maybe manufacturing or procurement. And again, without manual emails or maybe manual intervention of taking printouts or getting approvals. And I would say dashboards that show exactly so where everything is, at what stage is your current project or your tasks, or what is the stage of your change, you can say, uh, process. And managers can spot bottlenecks, prioritize tasks, and track key metrics. And because everything is stored in a central repository, everyone from engineering to supply chain can access accurate and real time data. So, in fact, Sean, I have spoken to a lot of managers during my last, I can say, role. So any design manager, the biggest challenge for them is to keep a track of everything, making sure that they can predict certain bottlenecks without using a data management solution. Their hands are real tied up because it's more of a firefighting that they usually do. And some if a manager is actually using a data management solution in place, so they are much more confident, much more, I would say, energetic in prioritizing things to be done, and forecasting any issues or challenges. And in a way, the teams of those managers are much more productive. So that's what a smarter, you can say, process looks like. So where you have to deal with fewer emails, no guesswork, and a process that actively supports team instead of getting in the way.
It makes me think I started smiling as you talked about fighting fires, and we all know what it's like to fight fires at work. No matter what you're doing, problems come up, and all of a sudden they are of peak, if not close to peak priority. And you weren't planning for them, but you had to go and fix them, and that sucks. It makes me think about fighting actual fires, right? So, like recently, I went to the hardware store and I got a fire extinguisher for our downstairs area where we have our grill outside. And the reason why I got a fire extinguisher isn't because I love fire extinguishers or because I love fires, because I don't. It's because I need it there in case it breaks out, right? So we don't want to organize our lives around constantly having to fight fire, which is, I think, a really good sort of illustrative point. And, another thing you said was, and you said this at the very beginning, was a smarter design workflow will feel at various extents, not to every extent, of course, but the various extent, it will feel relatively effortless, right? Because if these things are feeling very effortful and are taking up a lot of space in your brain, someone said to me once, you only have, let's say you have 100 tokens a day of effort and mind share that you can expend onto your family, your work, etc. How much of it are you extending out to poorly managed processes that can only be so good because you don't have the time or the effort to manage them when you can have a computer processor, a server service, like actually doing it at such relatively low cost compared to what you're doing today. And might I add, with less fires, always a good thing, right? So I think that kind of brings us to the next area, which, in terms of helpful holding, there are areas where we literally can't be everywhere at once, right? A lot of those areas are when, of course, we're working with others who are dynamic actors in their own lives, in their own work, especially those that are working on other teams, right? In organizations. And many of us that work in design or engineering capacities or have done so, we know that that's not the only part of a company that exists, and it's not the only part of the company that, as you said earlier, a company is a business, and the design and engineering portion of that company is part of that company. It is not the entire company most often, right? So I want to talk specifically about, because you have some interesting input here, about some interaction, some engagement that you've had observing non-CAD stakeholders. So we talked about pre-PDM. Now we're going to talk about non-CAD stakeholders. So when you've seen customers mid-project, how are they keeping these non-CAD stakeholders, like say a project manager or someone in manufacturing, in the loop sufficiently?
Yeah. So, in fact, Sean, before I jump onto the non-CAD stakeholders, so let me tell you the situation of the CAD stakeholder, the designers. So many a times they spend more engineering hours with the non-CAD stakeholders to explain them things than
Oh, okay.
doing the actual design.
Yes. Yeah, no, I see your point. So literally, we were talking about a system or a service being helpful to you and sort of holding your hand, right, with these aspects. But what you're talking about is literal hand holding of other departments, which I can say many of us did not get into our lines of work to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I have seen people rushing from design office to the production floor because because the people in the production or the assembly, they are not able to understand few things, or maybe instructions are not clear, or maybe they fail, something is not fitting properly, and then eventually they come to know that, oh, the document is not updated, or maybe they are using the wrong version, or things like that. Yeah. So I would say there's a big gap between most of the teams. So non-CAD stakeholders, and between project managers, procurement and manufacturing managers. They often they don't have access to the same system as designers. So what happens is designers create the exports and maybe a PDF of drawing, maybe an Excel bill of material, and then they email it or drop it into a shared drive. So the issue is that all this information becomes outdated almost, I would say, instantaneously. So if a designer has revised something, has to remember to re-export everything and then resend it, and that's often get missed. So decisions are being made using, I would say, stale data or outdated data. So also, there's usually no link between the file and the broader project context. The project manager might see the drawing, but don't know if it is being approved. Manufacturing might start using it without realizing there is a new version that exists. So this kind of misalignment can cause real downstream issues like incorrect parts, missed deadlines, and even safety risks as well. So what teams really need is a shared, you can say, a system, or I would say a centralized system, something that lets all stakeholder access current, contextual, and centralized, you can say, information. So even if they are not using CAD, so that's where solutions like SolidWorks product data management really is a game changer. So where we are offering the web access, the to all the non CAD stakeholders, and also yeah, they can have their specific set of views. They have, although limited access to data, but they have access to the real time and accurate data, and any sort of a live tracking of project or the design content. So they will have every, I would say, piece of information which is aligned without constant back and forth.
All right, so you had me and then you lost me, I'll be honest, right? So you're talking about like we've been talking about SOLIDWORKS users and SOLIDWORKS users with our processes, with working together on the same files, finding design iterations. These all sound great, right? Being effortless. But when you start talking about letting non-CAD users near the data in that same kind of pool, right? They have licenses to this thing. Like what it starts to feel like, I'm backing up. I'm backing up. Like I don't really want that. You're letting everyone in this gator pit over here. I don't like it. Getting uncomfortable. So uh help me. Help me understand, like, what challenges have come up in your experience when you kinda let, these, different teams interpret or modify, the same data set, of course, that can be an issue. So what have you seen issue wise, and then how is what you're proposing better than what I've seen in the past?
Yeah. So the most common issue that I have observed is everyone brings a different lens to the same data. So, and if that data isn't current and clearly documented, so people draw different conclusions. Engineering might view a design as complete, but manufacturing may see something they can't produce, so they tweak it. And this is what I have seen at with many customers. The drawing which is with the design team is different, but something which is there with the production is totally different, because they might have tweaked something to adjust the overall assembly, but they haven't communicated it back. And procurement might order based on an outdated bill of material as well. So, and none of them realize they are working on the mismatched sources. And mostly in such a situation, it's like we have different silos within the organization. Although they share the information through a traditional process, but if there are any changes they do locally, they it's not incorporated to or communicated to all the other departments. So I think the biggest challenge is when we have these silos, and then everybody do their own interpretation of the information. So this overall leads to inconsistencies, production errors, and worst case, probably product launch failures or delays as well. So it also wastes a lot of time, because teams end up in duplicating work or fixing mistakes that shouldn't have happened at the first place. So another issue is accountability. So if multiple versions are floating around, and someone goes uses a wrong version, it's hard to track back and see where the changes came from. So that lack of visibility can really hurt teams' morale and overall trust.
Got all that for sure. But now I'm letting them into my space. How does that get better? Like, how am I making it better by bringing them closer in a way?
Yeah, so having a centralized and a revision control system so ensures everyone literally is on the same page, and there is no version of truth. There is only one version of truth. So, and the any changes are tracked, documented, and visible to everyone across the organization. So it's not only about probably collaboration. It's I would say about uh, a confident, structured collaboration that should exist in any manufacturing organization.
Perfect. You know, Gurpreet, I think we've done the impossible. I think you've helped us trade our swamp for a solid work foundation, which is a pun that Jesse Sprague, our teammate, would be proud of, right? Solid work foundation. Yeah, I usually save those for him, but I gave you one as well. But once again, anyone in the live chat, please give Gurpreet a thumbs up. I wanted to shout out, by the way, as we close here, that part of the timeliness of this episode is that we have a new first look that is a succinct 3, 4-ish minutes long, right? Overviewing 5? Hey, a clean and even 5 minutes. Let's do it. So clean and even 5 minutes on product data management, uh, made specifically for the SOLIDWORKS user and the SOLIDWORKS using company, right? So you should check that out, Gurpreet. This is hot off the press, right? You just made this.
It's really amazing, Sean, to be part of your show here, and share my experiences that I had with customers for past so many years. And I believe if this episode even changes mind of one organization, I think it's a great effort that we have put across. But I believe the challenges that those we have discussed today are practical, and most of our customers, those are in the, I would say, pre-PDM process or maybe mechanism. So they face day in and out. And I believe we can actually create much more agile and a productive organization if they move from pre-PDM to a a system like SolidWorks product data management. So wherein they will be able to uh, uh, I would say, cut down on all the silos, connect all the key stakeholders in the organization, and let them have access to the centralized information and centralized data, which is always up to date with the latest revision, latest versions, automatic workflows, the project management, process management, bomb management capabilities. I think it is going to add a lot of value to our design and manufacturing community.
Excellent. Well, Gurpreet, thank you so much for once again taking us from the swamp to a solid foundation. Really appreciate you jumping on the SolidWorks Live. Assuredly, this will not be the last time you're on the program. Once again, take care. Thank you so much.
Pleasure is mine.